anything that it follows the legal system of Texas. We don't want to do that alone. We want to have a professional by our side the entire process. There are so many things that come up during the process.
Service members should get the most out of their VA benefits for home ownership. That's our belief, and that's why we're here. So whether you're looking to own your dream home, considering refinancing, or just exploring the VA home loan process, you've come to the right place. Welcome to Helping Heroes Become Homeowners. So the settlement rulings here, it started August 17th. The way you're going to buy and sell properties has changed. So if you're in the market now, this is a great podcast to listen to. Hi, my name is Richard Sarey with Alliance Mortgage Group, and this is Helping Heroes Become Homeowners. Today I have with me Chris Cox with Carrie Himel Group with Compass Real Estate. Chris, thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely excited to be here.
So it's here. It's in the news. It's been in the news. How buying and selling real estate has changed. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about what that ruling looks like now and how that's moving forward for people?
Yes. So back in May, NAR, National Association of Realtors, they basically settled a series of lawsuits that at least the DOJ was saying were antitrust scenarios out there, where there were sellers that felt like they were forced to provide buyer agency commission, and that it was, there was no negotiation involved. And so that's kind of just, the nuts and bolts of the ruling. So what happened on August 17th, it actually happened 2 weeks prior to that in Texas. We got a little head start on it. Buyer agency commission, that particular spot on MLS where you would typically put that in, has gone away. And so now it's always been a negotiation in Texas, but it is impacting. There's about 30 states that this is gonna really impact, that haven't been as transparent with the forms that they've had on the state level. So
the first thing that a buyer should probably talk to you about is what that buyer rep's going to do for them and all the ins and outs of what that agreement's about, right?
Correct. So, what they are telling us from the settlement is that we are now required to have a buyer's rep agreement signed before even showing a house. Okay. So we can kind of talk about the impacts of that a little bit later if you want to. But so essentially, the buyer has to know what you are asking for as a buyer's rep for your commission. That is negotiated between the buyer and the buyer's rep. In the past, it's just pretty much been a given. The seller is going to provide, industry standard 3% for the seller, 3% for the buyer that brings a client, to purchase that particular house. So that in theory could change to where there could be a lot of different scenarios where a seller says, absolutely not. We are not providing buyer agent compensation or BAC. We're just doing, compensating our seller's agent. And so that would go back to if the buyer wants to use an agent throughout the whole process of purchasing that house, then they would compensate that buyer's agent themselves.
And how important is to have a buyer rep, have an agent on your side when it comes to negotiating home inspections? I mean, that's kind of hard to do on your own, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's what the great thing about an experienced agent is he or she has basically had every scenario come up that can go through, that can happen through the contract process. There's a bunch of different, not only is the negotiation piece at the beginning extremely important. We have access to you know, access to all kinds of different comps. So to ensure that a buyer is not overpaying for a property, everything. My thing is this, Richard. All these documents are legal documents, and you don't want, as a buyer, you don't want to tackle, anything that it follows the legal system of Texas. We don't want to do that alone. We want to have a professional by our side the entire process. There are so many things that come up during the process. We have to schedule inspections. Inspections are so important to ensure that you're not walking into a lemon of a house. And agents have connections. They have referral partners with inspectors, with lenders. I've been in situations where you've helped me, Richard, with, a client that may not be able to get approval from a big bank lender, but maybe can with another lender. And you've been able to help us through that process. If I didn't know you and hadn't had that relationship, that buyer would still be renting and would be throwing money away in the trash can and lighting it every month.
Yeah.
There's so many things. I know we don't have time on one podcast, but there's so many things that we go through to help our buyers get to the finish line, because it's not an easy process to go from day one contract to typically day 30, the closing date.
Right.
There's a lot of hurdles that come up.
Well, there's a lot of steps in between.
Yes, sir.
And I think one of the biggest ones that we overcame was, if a buyer didn't have a real estate agent going through that process with them, and the value doesn't come in for contract price, then I guess you as the buyer is going to have to put your negotiating hat on and do what you think you need to do, or what's best, right? How are you going to get that information? How are you going to get comps? I mean, there's a lot of things that come into play on helping that buyer get the right price for that home if it doesn't appraise for the list price.
Right.
And when it comes to inspections, like you said, what's a good inspection? What's a bad inspection? What's a mediocre inspection?
Right.
So it kind of has what the buyer needs to have that person on the sidelines, not on the sidelines, so to speak, but in your corner to help you decide what's right for you and what needs to be fixed, things of that sort. So that's important to have that representation at all times, not just part of the story, the whole entire part of the purchase time.
Absolutely. I kind of think of an agent as like the quarterback that's in a system that, you have checks at the line, right? You're going to always the defenses are always going to, manipulate themselves in different formations, so forth, to try to put themselves in the best situation to overcome the offense. And it's kind of that agent's responsibility to kind of call the check and get around that, the shifts of the defense and everything that could come up during that contract. You've got to have an answer for that, to be able to get to the finish line or get to, move yourself down the field, if you will.
So I know this is all new, but have you had any difficulties that you can maybe talk about so far, or things kind of just running its course? Are we still kind of seeing what the unintended consequences are of the ruling? Well,
here's kind of what I'm seeing, and it's only been about 3 weeks in Texas, so we have a very a very small sample size right now. But in the 3 weeks, I'll be honest with you, I haven't seen a whole lot of change. And I think the main reason that I haven't seen a whole lot of change is we have the most inventory we've had, selling inventory that we've had since 2019. And so it's a very, very, very competitive market right now. I was doing a search yesterday for I had a very specific search from like 950,000 to 1.2 million in Frisco. Frisco's a big city, but it's not enormous. It's not Dallas. It's not Fort Worth. And there were 65 homes in just that little sample size that were available right now. I can remember back in 2022, I had a listing that was about 650, somewhere in that range. And homes in Frisco for sale, there were 69 total.
Wow.
And back in 2022. So we're going from having, less than 100 houses for sale to having, 100 houses for sale in a little bracket of, $200,000, essentially $250,000. So we just have a ton of inventory. So that particular seller that decides, you know what, I'm not going to pay buyer agent compensation, there's that buyer can just go to the next house because he knows or she knows that, if I go to this next house that is offering 3% buyer agency compensation, I'm going to end up saving the price is the same, 1.2 million, say.
Right.
Now I'm going to save 3% by, purchasing this house versus the other one.
So as a listing agent, I know you do both sides, but as a listing agent, when you're representing the seller, does the net sheet for his proceeds after it's sold, how is that? What are those conversations looking like? Because you're not increasing the sell of the home to make, or let me rephrase that. If you're going to increase the sell of the property on the list price to pad the agent commission on the other side, so you're netting out the same amount. Is that thought process changing, or hey, this is the true list price, this is what our net's going to be if we do or do not have to pay a buyer rep?
Yeah, I think the smart thing to do, to be completely transparent with sellers, is to run a whole lot of different net sheets, right? Here's the scenarios. Here's what we're looking at. This is the price it needs to be, bottom line, because that's the market we're in. That the market hasn't changed. We are still on average for buyer agency commission nationwide. It's still something like 2.65 to 2.7. So we're still in that 3% range. And we've known this was coming since probably December, January. And so nothing has really changed in regards to the standard compensation.
Right.
So you have to, it's not going to change the price of the house because, there's just too much competition out there. You can't say, all right, we're going to split the difference and we can price this house at $15,000 more because we're only paying 1.5% buyer agency commission. So it doesn't work that way. The price is the price. We're working off comps in the neighborhood. The price is the price. Now, granted, yes, you're gonna net more money if you only offer 1.5% buyer agency commission. But again, It goes back to the whole competition piece. If this similar house right down the street is still 4-bed, 4-bath with a pool, just like the house I'm looking at with the same upgrades, and then there's another one down the street that's the same, one's offering 1.5, one's offering 3%, then, for a buyer as well, they don't have to cover the extra 1.5% if you've signed a buyer rep agreement that says that buyer is paying you 3%.
Yeah. Do we see a difference with the builders in that aspect?
Okay, so interesting that you asked that. We had a scenario on our team just last week. Big builder, very popular builder. They would not allow an agent on our team. They would not allow that agent to basically be a part of the contract that they were about to write until we provided a buyer's rep agreement. So, all right, what does that mean? All right, what that could mean to, and it's all speculation at this point because it's so new, but, builders advertise quite a bit. I get emails on a daily basis. They advertise better mortgage rates than prime, right? They're offering 3.99%, because I call it the Costco, we buy a ton and we can discount. So they're offering that. They're offering $10,000 of closing. And then on top of that, they're telling us as agents for bringing buyers into them, they're not only offering 3%, they may even offer a bonus on top of that, $5,000, $10,000 bonus. Well, if things change and, here, let me just give you a scenario. All right. I'm taking that buyer in. Okay. It's just an assumption that builder is giving 3% buyer agency commission.
Right.
Okay. So, I walk in, we see the house we love. I'm with my clients. They decide, all right, we want to sign. Okay. Now, in the old days, you wouldn't sign your buyer rep agreement until you hand in the contract.
Right.
Okay. Let's say we already signed a buyer's rep agreement and it said 3% on there. Okay. But now we walk in, I've got my buyer's rep, I hand it to the builder and they say, oh, all we have to pay you is 3%. You don't get that $10,000 bonus now. So that could be a change where the builder isn't going to advertise as much in regards to advertise to agents as much because they don't want to lose that extra money that they could have saved.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so absolutely.
It could definitely change the game in regards to new homes.
If that's the case, will there be any leverage to negotiate the sales price with the builder a little bit lower then? If they're not going to give that?
We will absolutely try that. And there are ways around that where we can, and it may be a situation where agents have to bring their laptop with them, to new builds. And if they're offering more than what we thought they were going to offer, then we may have to do an amendment right there and a new buyer's rep.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting how that's going to be fluid to where the unintended consequence might be a positive thing, maybe.
Yeah.
In some scenarios.
Absolutely.
I know with lending, from the lending side of things on this, if we know that the buyer has to cover a certain percentage based on that buyer agreement, and the seller is not willing to help in that, then we as a lender have to disclose what that cost is going to be on the loan estimate. Because that becomes their cash to close that they have to bring to closing to cover the agent's commission. So from our standpoint, there are a few different ways that we can try and help out. And that is either a reduction in fee, price the loan out where we can get some credit to the buyer to help offset that cost. Right now, those are the only two solutions that I can think of outside of a seller concession. I mean, the seller concession is going back to, well, if you're not going to pay the buyer rep agreement, why are you doing a concession? But you can. I guess that would come into play after the inspection is done and use those dollars to cover, maybe in that way. But for the most part, from a lending aspect, that's something we have to start considering for that final cash to close figure. Do they have enough assets to cover that? And if not, then we'll structure the loan accordingly to help out in that way, if we can do that. So there's also a lending aspect of it too.
Right. And I mean, personally, and I don't have, unfortunately, I didn't bring my crystal ball with me today, but, the more inventory there is, in my perspective, and the more inventory there is, the less things are going to change.
Yeah.
If rates drop to 3% again, which I don't think anybody foresees that happening, and we get to a point where all these buyers get off the bench and we shift, even though I'd say we're in more of a neutral market right now, because we still don't have that 6 months of inventory that we're, that we want to be truly neutral. We're at about 4.5 months right now in our area. So, if that changes and we get back to the days of 2022, then maybe things do change a bit, with if there if there's only one house in my price point available in a certain area, and sellers may not need to offer buyer agency compensation at that point. So
with that being said, what is it more important now more than ever to have a true pre-approved buyer along with the buyer agreement that you and the buyer have in place? Because
yes.
You have some lenders that just do a pre-qualification. They're not doing a pre-approval, they're doing a pre-qualification just based on credit score, and that's it. They're not doing the full 9 yards where they're looking at assets, looking at income, really looking at credit, making sure there's no red flags within the credit that may discount that approval. So is that something that needs to be included before you execute the rep agreement with the buyer?
That would be very helpful. I hate wasting time.
Sure.
And, if I'm going to go show, on average, I would say before we buy a home, if I'm working with a buyer, we're probably going to see between 15 and 20 houses on average. And that's at least in our area with traffic and everything else, and probably seeing multiple locations, multiple cities, you're talking about 12, 15 hours of work. That would really, really be sad if I sit down, they find their dream house, we write the offer, and 2 days later I figure out they're not even close to being able to be approved for a loan.
Right.
So absolutely, and right now it really is, even though we're getting closer to a neutral market, and it really depends on the house, right? It depends on what they're looking for. Because right now, if you're in that $300,000 to $400,000 range, we could still be looking at multiple offers. We could still absolutely be looking at, we could still be looking at not just multiple, 10 offers. And so the further along in the process, especially for a buyer like that, that helps us, because every good agent is going to call the lender. Yep. And before they accept an offer, and they're going to ask that lender, and you've got the responsibility as a lender to be honest with the agent. And if they have just called in and submitted, a piece of paper for you, and you've got a pre-qual and that's it, and apples to apples, if I'm a listing agent, it's the same offer. It's the same, even let's just say it happens to be the same lender, but one has a pre-approval and one has a pre-qual. What are you going to pick as a listing agent? Not a listing agent, the client. What is your client going to pick in that kind of situation? The seller's going to pick the one that's further along in the process.
Do you think the listing agent, in my mind, I believe they're having those conversations with the sellers. Hey, we need to probably compensate because we want qualified buyers coming to look at the home. Mm-hmm. So, with that being said, are there any stipulations, the listing agents, that you can foresee are going to maybe put on that before they show a property to a potential person that wants to look at it?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Yeah. So, if you have a buyer rep agreement,
mm-hmm. Yeah,
and they may or may not contribute, but we have a qualified buyer, is there going to be stipulations that the listing agent is going to want to see from the lending aspect of it before they even say, hey, yeah, we'll let you come look at the property? And
again, a lot of times that'll depend on the price point. Basically, our cutoff is $1 million. So it's an arbitrary number, right? But if it's $1 million property, we're going to ask for financials before they show the property. Typically, and there's a reason for that. We don't want 1,000 people coming through a home just to see the home. You never know what's going to happen in that kind of scenario. A lot of times there's some very nice upgrades. There's a lot of things that are sitting out that you've got to it's just safer for the seller, because we want that qualified buyer. So Absolutely. We'll ask for financials if it's a pre-approval situation. If it's a conventional loan situation, then we'll ask, for that pre-approval. If it's cash, we'll look for financials. So yeah, the more qualified the buyer, the better the chance we have as a seller's agent to get a good offer out of that qualified buyer.
Okay. What happens when a buyer doesn't have any representation? Let's rephrase that. If I have no realtor, I'm going to be in the market looking for homes, and I just want to look at homes on an open house day, and I find 3 in my neighborhood that I want to go visit, and I go through the open house. If I have no representation, or let's say I have representation but don't have the realtor with me at the time, can I, as a buyer, ask the seller, if I'm savvy enough, to ask him, are you willing to pay an agent commission at an open house?
Oh, absolutely, they can.
You can ask that even though it's not listed anywhere else anymore?
Yes. So that's really the only way that you can figure out if there's buyer agency commission or not.
Well, I wasn't sure if you didn't have an agent representing you as you walked in, if you could have that open conversation with the agent. You can.
Absolutely. Okay. And what I'll tell you what typically can happen if you're walking through unrepresented. Okay. So there's a couple of different things. You can walk around, you can go to 3 or 4, bounce in 3 or 4 open houses, and you can say, all right, now I'm ready. I love this house. I don't want to lose it. And obviously they can call an agent at that point. What happens a lot, and this is why agents do so many open houses, and, even that are not their own. Compass is a huge company. And so a lot of our agents will do other agents' open houses on other teams, because it's a great way to potentially build a relationship with an unrepresented buyer that's walking through that open house. So, but yes, absolutely. I would never suggest a potential buyer going, and we already talked about this, going at it alone. There's just too many things that can come up, because when we say unrepresented, you are unrepresented. Like, you don't have the same access, especially for comps, that that an agent will have, and you could definitely overpay in our market. And, you're going to probably end up losing more money than if you would have taken that 3% off of a commission. Right. And so, it's super important, but yes, that conversation is happening even in open houses. And I'll tell you this, we're starting to see a lot of signs at open houses and at listings that just post 3% commission.
Really?
Off. Yeah, a lot of the emails that are going out from agents, the mass emails on new properties, will have that in the tagline. We can advertise it pretty much everywhere but MLS.
Oh, I did not know that. Okay. So it doesn't have to be a secret until you put it in an offer. It's possibly known it before. Well, that's good to know.
Yeah. And so here's what I know we're kind of getting off the path just slightly, but I think it's important for folks to hear. This has created for a buyer's agent a lot more work. I'll just be honest.
Absolutely.
If I'm going to show, let's say I'm going to show 10 houses today, and I've got that buyer's rep signed at 3%, and my buyer has told me that, hey, I only want to see properties at 3%. Because I don't want to have to cover that extra half point or 2 points or whatever it is, or 3 points.
Yeah.
So I'm going to need you to call every house that I want to see today and see if they're offering 3% BAC, buyer agency commission.
Wow.
So it's gone from maybe taking, 30 minutes to an hour to put a tour together to taking hours to try to get in touch with agents to ensure that they're offering that buyer agency commission.
So you're having to spend a lot of time on the prior day when you're mapping out
Yeah,
schedule.
you can't just, if a client says, hey, I want to go see these 5 houses in an hour. Sorry, we're going to have to go tomorrow. We're going to have to go tomorrow. So the whole premise, I mean, the way I read the NAR settlement is, a big part of that was transparency, right? Like that there was a lack of transparency. Well, how is this transparent? Where we have to basically go on a wild goose chase to find out what the commission is.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's a good idea. At least putting it out there on an open house or on a flyer or on, I guess, can you put it on the website? Can you do it that way on their own personal real estate website?
So that's my understanding is that's still kind of up in the air.
Okay.
So, you cannot. So the thing is with MLS, there was that little category there for BAC. That's gone. That's non-existent anymore. MLS will not allow us to link to a website yet.
Oh, okay.
We're hoping that they'll eventually do that. So they can just link. There's the link there in the private remarks or whatever on the MLS listing. Here it is. It goes to our website and it shows that 3% buyer agency commission. So we're kind of where I don't want to say like, because things are going to, I really truly feel like things are so murky right now and muddy that there's still a lot of things up for interpretation. So I feel like that's where it's going to go, is that there's going to be more and more buyers that will just look at company websites as opposed to, those sites that pull directly from MLS. Because I feel like that they're going to allow, because they have to, they're going to allow on the private websites, like a Compass website, a Carrie Himel Group website, us to put that in there, that we are offering, or the seller is offering, buyer agency commission.
Okay. And
it's really the seller's broker is offering that. So,
okay. I know with VA lending, when this ruling came out, there was a bunch of pushback with it, because with VA loans forever, the veteran can't pay any agent commission.
Right.
And, they did rule, I think, for 2 years without actually putting an actual letter together. But with VA loans, they are letting the veteran pay for the commission. That can come out of a concession as well. So they're not left in the dust with the possibility of not being able to purchase a home because of that. So they have made a stand on allowing the commissions to be paid by the veteran, and also could be included in a concession because it's customary. Okay. So that's a good thing. Yes. As long as they basically are in line with Fannie and Freddie for conventional, right, when it comes to that. So they are protected, which is important. We actually have a VA loan closing tomorrow out in the fields in Frisco, and they got in before the buyer rep change. So the builder is compensating, whatever it was. It's higher than 3, but it is going to change when it comes. I think it's really going to change when it comes to the new build, as far as how that looks, because you can always walk in without an agent on a new build and not know any better, but thinking you're outsmarting the game of the commission aspect of it. But you still need the things. Even when we built this home, we had a realtor. And it's just the things that you have to stay on top of when the house is just being built to your standard. You're going by the house every day, but the agent's still taking care of all the things on the back end that you're not really aware of with the builder. Right. So it's still important to have that agent representation, even if you're buying a new build, for sure.
I'll give you a kind of a funny example on that. Is I had a couple new builds last year in Anna, and I popped in, I was in the area just to see how the build was coming along. And I walked up in the attic just to check things out. And there was no insulation in the attic, and they were closing at the end of the week.
Oh,
there was
Lord.
Zero insulation. And so 105 degree temperatures in Texas with zero insulation. And if I wouldn't have walked through that house, no one would have known that. So I immediately call the builder, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, we just skipped that house."
Well,
I
I
can't.
guess the inspector skipped it too.
Yeah, yeah. So
Wow.
it's things like that where it's the realtor's eye, right? We see hundreds of houses a year, and we start picking up on some of these things that a typical buyer. Now there's some buyers that'll know construction and
Yeah.
everything that goes along with a build, but there's those little things that we know to look for that could save thousands of dollars down the road for the client. So
Yeah. And I mean, a good example of this house that we built, we had a realtor, but she came by the house one evening when we were out of town,
mhm.
and the spigot on the outside of the house, I guess, wasn't tied in correctly, and it flooded half of our bedroom. And if she wasn't there, she wouldn't have been able to turn off the water, and the water was still on for some reason or another. I don't know why it was still on, but
Mhm.
you know, she kind of helped save the day, so to speak, because it could have flooded the whole entire bottom half of our bedroom.
Yeah,
So they had to, tear all that out and redo all that and do a whole 9 yards on that too. But, it's having a second set of eyes and a second opinion too,
mhm.
when you have that representation. And you're
Absolutely.
purchasing a home. I mean, that's a huge asset. So you also want to
And
have
it's
that too.
emotional as well. You also need
Absolutely.
somebody, right by your side that isn't as emotional and can think straight at a time where it becomes very emotional, and it curbs our mindset. So I feel like half the time I'm counselor, as much as I am realtor. So
Yeah, absolutely. So is there anything, I know we talked a lot about this settlement. Is there anything that you can see forward thinking where this might take anybody in terms of the buyer or the seller side down the road?
I think I kind of alluded to it earlier. I think the only major changes that we could see down the line is if mortgage rates, get back down in the threes, like they did back in 2020, 21, 20, even into 22. Where there's just no inventory out there. So, sellers aren't as likely potentially to offer a significant amount of buyer agency commission because maybe they feel like they don't have to. Now, what that could create, the negative side of that, is that could create a scenario where there's a lot of people that think they can go at it unrepresented.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's ever a good thing. Would you have a surgery, a life-saving surgery, from reading or maybe looking at a YouTube video and trying to figure it out yourself?
Yeah.
And it just doesn't make sense in a professional setting to go at something that you're not trained in. Lawyers make 30% every time they help someone through a process.
Yeah.
Realtors, we're making 2.5 to 3%, and we're working with legal documents that we have been trained on for 180 hours to start, which is basically a master's degree. And then, basically 30 to 90, depending on where you are in your real estate career, 30 to 90 more hours every 2 years.
You're constantly in a book or studying.
Yes, absolutely.
Just to maintain your license. Yeah, we have that too. Not that many hours, but
yeah,
it's there every year. But what I'm afraid of is for that first time home buyer that thinks they can handle it on their own.
Yeah.
Or maybe forced into trying to handle it on their own because they're tight on money.
Mm-hmm.
I see it as a very unique situation where people want to dive into that and do that, but I don't think that's ever going to become the norm.
No. And, still, even there was so much early media coverage of the NAR, and there's a lot of, there was a lot of news outlets that were basically saying, the whole game has changed. There's no more buyer agency commission. All the
it got you clicks.
Yeah, you saw all the headlines that it's going away. There's the whole real estate game is going away. There, you'll see less and less agents. Yada yada yada. But they did a survey not too long ago. They meaning. I can't remember who did it, whether it was U.S. News or somebody reputable that still said, 85 to 90% of buyers want an agent along their side. And so it's not going to change in regards to having an agent. It's just, things could potentially change a bit in regards to how those agents are getting paid.
Yeah, I agree.
So.
Well, this is good stuff. I appreciate you being on. If somebody wants to get in touch with you as representation on a purchase loan, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, the easiest way would just be email. My email is Chris, CHRIS.Cox @compass.com. So that's probably the easiest way. Instagram, pretty easy as well. It's at Coach Cox 9 Realtor. I was a ex-baseball player, and that was my number all the way through. So that's why it's got a 9 there.
Perfect. Well, mine doesn't have a number, but it's rsarey @alliancemtggroup.net. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm talking about rates. Rates have dropped, so it's a good time to at least approach that aspect of seeing what's out there for you. And my website at alliancemtggroup.net. Well, I appreciate you being on, Chris.
Absolutely.
And we'll go from there. Thanks for joining us. Talk to you soon.
Talk soon.
If this episode has been beneficial, we'd love to hear from you. Please leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Also, for regular updates and tips, make sure to follow our social media channels, which you can find in the show notes. Until our next episode, keep making homeownership dreams come true.